has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch Michael by there.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
Hello, folks, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. You know, folks, I know that when we discuss the Gilgo Beach case, Rex Heuermann, and of course, the Brian Kohberger case, that there are so many terms, I think, that are unfamiliar to a lot of members of our audience. And many of you out there may be suffering with not understanding them, because not all of these terms you can just Google and come up with and get a good understanding of it. So today I'm going to try to simplify some of these terms. Some of them are what I call copisms, or, police lingo, lawyer lingo, that type of thing. But when you look at the cases, Heuermann, Kohberger legal definition of terms, complexity. And some of these terms, of course, are used every single day by the police and the prosecution. However, not necessarily in the layman's vernacular. And here's one thing that's used over and over and over and over again: probable cause. Probable cause, people use it, and I don't really think that they fully understand it. Probable cause really is the lowest standard of proof in the criminal justice system, and it has to do with the law of arrest. And in my own words, I would define it as facts and circumstances that would allow a reasonable person to believe that a crime has been committed and the person being arrested committed that crime. I think that's a sort of almost word-for-word definition. But if you look it up, in a dictionary, they'll say probable cause is a reasonable belief or suspicion that a crime has been, is being, or is about to be committed. It requires more than a mere hunch or suspicion, but less evidence than what is needed for a conviction. It is often described as a level of certainty that a reasonable person would have based on the facts and circumstances known to the law enforcement officer at the time. So again, I made it a little simpler in my own words. And before law enforcement can effect an arrest, they need probable cause. If an arrest without probable cause is it's an illegal arrest, right? Search and seizure. To conduct a search or seizure, such as searching person's home or vehicle, law enforcement needs probable cause. So same thing. If a warrant, what is the standard of proof for a search warrant? And it's probable cause. To obtain a search warrant from a judge, law enforcement officers must provide sufficient evidence to establish probable cause. There's the word again, that a crime has been committed and that evidence related to that crime can be found in the location being searched. So just, an overview, a quick overview of what probable cause is. And I think that most people that listen to real crime, to true crime, they believe that they know these definitions, but, maybe they don't. Maybe they don't. There was a term used over and over and over again in the Gilgo Beach case, of course, Rex Heuermann. And that case, that term used in the Rex Heuermann case was trophy. What is a trophy? And when used in connection with a serial killer, it's a very specific thing. And a trophy in the context of serial killers refers to an item that the killer takes from a victim as a macabre keepsake. These items are often chosen because they have some personal connection to the victim or the crime itself. Trophies can vary widely, but common examples include jewelry, clothing, identification cards, or other personal belongings of the victim. Serial killers may keep these trophies as souvenirs of their crimes, and the possession of such items can provide them with a sense of power and control. It's more than that. It's almost like the serial killer reliving the crime to a piece of something that belonged to his victim. Horrific for us to think of, but that in essence is what a trophy is. Now, then you may ask, then what is a souvenir? If that's a trophy, then what is a souvenir? And uh, a souvenir in the context of a serial killer, again, is essentially the same as a trophy. It's an item taken from a victim and retained by the killer as a grim reminder of the crime. Serial killers may collect these souvenirs for a variety of reasons, including the desire to relive the experience of the murder, to exert control over their victims, even in death, or to create a personal connection to their victims. It's important to note that actions of serial killers, including a collection of trophies or souvenirs, are deeply disturbing. Of course, we all know that. Someone just asked me this week, because I was on the TV show New York Homicide, and we used the term, and I call this a copism. We used the term push-in robbery. And they weren't fully understanding of what a push-in robbery was. So instead of Googling it, which they probably did anyway, but they asked me, they emailed me or they messaged me. And I told them, well, the push-in robbery has to do with someone usually that follows someone off the street into their building, and then at some point pulls a knife or a gun and forces them into their apartment. Thus, this crime immediately becomes a burglary and a robbery at the same time. So that would be known as a push-in robbery, where the robber pushed in the victim and usually displayed a firearm or a gun. Now you get a little more complex. Everyone uses the term DNA, and simply, if I asked 100 people, maybe 50% of those 100 people could give me the definition of what is DNA. And DNA simply is, well, it's not simple. The scientific term for it is deoxyribonucleic acid. But to make it very, very simple, if you asked me, if I was giving you a test and I said, what is DNA? And you said, DNA is a person's genetic code. Boom. You got the answer. You got that right. I don't think anyone could argue with that DNA is someone's genetic code. And DNA in today's investigations comes into play almost all the time. Of course, we remember in the Brian Kohberger case, the knife sheath, of course, right? And the knife sheath in regards to these cases of Ethan Chapin, Zana Kernodle, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonsalves, the victims of that case. So the sequence of DNA is nitrogenous bases along a DNA strand constitutes the genetic code. This code contains instructions for the synthesis of proteins, which play essential roles in the structure and function of cells. Proteins are involved in nearly all cellular processes, making them critical for life. So all of this stuff is really technical stuff. So then you may ask then, okay, there's different types of DNA. There's different types of ways to process DNA. What is mitochondrial DNA? All right. It's a type of genetic material found in the mitochondria, which are small, specialized structures within cells that are often referred as the powerhouses of the cell. Unlike the nuclear DNA found in the cell's nucleus, which contains the majority of organisms' genetic information, mitochondrial DNA is unique in several ways. Mitochondrial DNA is believed to have different evolutionary origin than nuclear DNA. It's thought to have originated from a symbiotic relationship between primitive eukaryotic cells and bacteria, which eventually evolved into the mitochondria. We also must know one thing to know is that it's inherited from the mother, from the maternal side of the family. Now, I could go into real deep, but I'm not going to. I just want to do a working understanding of some of these terms because they're very complex. And when we throw them out there like we're scientists, which we're clearly not, it becomes more difficult for everyone to understand what we're talking about here. And what we really want is for everyone to understand. We want everyone to understand what's going on in these cases. In the Brian Kohberger case, we hear the term numerous times touch DNA. Touch DNA is also known as trace DNA or contact DNA, and it refers to DNA evidence that is left behind when a person touches an object or a surface. It involves the transfer of microscopic skin cells, along with other bodily fluids and materials, from an individual's skin onto an item or surface they come in contact with. Touch DNA has become a valuable tool in forensic science and criminal investigations. Now, so then why are the defense attorneys and many and other scientists making a big deal out of touch DNA being on the button of the knife sheath that was next to Madison Mogen's body or underneath her body in 1122 King Road? And that DNA, when compared, first it was identified as matching Brian Kohberger's father. And once that test was done, once Brian Kohberger was in custody, they took a DNA swab and they compared his DNA against the knife sheath, and it was, I don't know how many trillions to one that it wasn't of anyone else in the world but Brian Kohberger's. However, attorneys can argue that touch DNA can be transferred from other objects. It could be put on that object. So they still have a defense to that, even though I would find it hard to believe that this DNA, with all the other facts and circumstances in regards to this case, that this DNA belongs to anyone else but Brian Kohberger. So then another thing with DNA we're seeing a lot of in these cases is investigative genetic genealogy. It's a forensic technique that combines genetic genealogy and traditional investigative methods to identify individuals involved in criminal cases, particularly cold cases and unsolved crimes. This innovative approach leverages DNA profiles obtained from crime scene evidence to search for potential relatives and ancestors of the unknown suspect, ultimately leading to the identification and apprehension of the perpetrator. DNA profiling, investigative genetic genealogy, begins with the collection of DNA evidence from a crime scene. Remember how we spoke about in CODIS? There's two types, or two, I shouldn't say types, two categories of DNA in CODIS, which stands for the Combined DNA Index System, which is run by the FBI. And the two categories of DNA are convicted offender DNA, which goes into the FBI database for certain crimes, and unidentified forensic DNA from crime scenes. So those are the two categories of DNA. So it gets very, very complicated. However, genealogical databases, once a DNA profile is obtained, it's compared to publicly available genealogical databases, most notably commercial genetic testing services like Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, and GEDmatch. These databases contain the genetic data of individuals that voluntarily submitted their DNA for genealogical and ancestral searches. One of the most important things about investigative genetic genealogy is building family trees. Investigators work to construct extensive family trees based on the genealogical information of the potential relatives. This involves tracing ancestral lines, identifying common ancestors, and creating a comprehensive family histories. It's so much more complicated than I can explain here. And I'm just trying to explain certain terms so that we understand these certain terms. There's also something there's something called predictive geographical criminal analysis. Wow, that's a mouthful. Predictive geographical criminal analysis. And when you talk about, there's the beaches in the Gilgo case, right? Predictive geographical criminal analysis, also known as predictive policing, is an approach that uses data analysis and technology to forecast where and when crimes are likely to occur. This method aims to help law enforcement agencies allocate their resources more effectively, prevent crimes, and reduce criminal activity in specific geographic areas. Here are the key components and aspects of predictive geographical criminal analysis. Of course, data collection, machine learning and algorithms, predictive models, hotspot mapping, resource allocation, crime prevention, ethical and legal considerations, privacy concerns, evolution and feedback, and community engagement. One of the reasons it was so important in the Gilgo case, of course, was when you connected the dots between Rex Heuermann, the Chevy Avalanche, the burner phones, the Massapequa Park pings of the cell phone, the Manhattan pings of the cell phone pinging in other areas of Suffolk and Nassau County, that becomes predictive geographic analysis. Predictive geographic analysis. So all of this is interconnected. I don't mean to work everyone's brain today because there's so many terms here. And finally, cell phone tracking refers to the process of locating and monitoring the real-time or historical movements and whereabouts of a mobile phone or its user. This technology has legitimate uses in various fields, including law enforcement, emergency services, and location-based services, but it also raises privacy and security concerns. So again, this is a science unto itself. And why, because of this science, did Rex Heuermann use what's called a burner phone? And a burner phone is a colloquial term for a prepaid mobile phone that is typically used temporarily and then discarded or replaced. These phones are often associated with anonymity and privacy because they can be purchased without providing personal identification or undergoing credit checks, and they do not require long-term contracts. So obviously, someone that's involved in some kind of criminal activity has a reason to try to remain anonymous, to try not to have their phone registered, and uses what's called a burner phone and just simply re-ups the minutes on this burner phone to continue their anonymity. Again, Professor Mike Geary would use the term consciousness of guilt, right? Premeditation, because the person intends to commit a criminal act. So therefore, they're trying ahead of time to thwart this criminal act by using something called a burner phone. And in Rex Heuermann's case, he was using these phones to contact escorts and didn't think that the police would ever be able to catch him through that. So, folks, I hope this episode today was helpful of Heuermann and Kohberger legal definition of terms and the complexity. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you very soon. Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. Have a great day, everyone.
One episode just ain't enough.